Message series where we're exploring Psalm 23 together. We're talking about how David describes this life that is defined by the light of God. And that when we live in that light, He leads us, He guides us, He provides for us. When we celebrate baptism, it's a signifier to us of dying to this old dark way of living and being raised to this new life that's defined by the light of God's presence. And so we're kind of walking our way through Psalm 23 and just exploring in detail what this life looks like. So we've talked over the past couple weeks about what it means for God to be our shepherd, how He is ridiculously in control of our lives over all things at all times. Last week we talked about what it means to be able to truthfully say, I lack nothing, that in every season I am perfectly content. This morning we're going to focus in on this idea that God comes to restore our souls, that He takes what is broken and He can refresh it, renew it, remake it in His image. One of the things that I'm hoping for us to do as we work our way through Psalm 23 is for each of us to memorize this psalm, really internalize it, and let it be something that the Holy Spirit will bring back to our hearts and to our minds when we need it the most. And so I don't know how your experience is going with that. What I'm finding for myself is apparently I need to be reminded of Psalm 23 every day. Because there are several times in each moment where God is bringing back portions of this psalm to me. And so my hope is that you begin to have some of those same experiences. And to help you in that memorization process, I'm going to ask you to read Psalm 23 with me as we get started this morning. We'll start there in verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely Your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This morning, as I said, we're going to focus in on those first, second, and third verse. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. Now, depending on the translation you read, that first part of verse 3 might say, He restores my soul. But regardless of which English word we choose to use, the underlying meaning of the Hebrew word David uses remains the same. Refreshment or restoration. It's both this idea of life breaks us, life wears us down and wears us out, and God comes to us in this life to bring peace, to bring healing, to bring renewal, and to bring refreshment to us. And so I really love that term restore because I think it paints a very vivid picture for us of exactly what David is describing. He's saying, look, when you are broken, God does not come and just make you feel better in your brokenness, but He comes to restore, to rebuild, to remake your soul. And I know some of you are probably fans of some of those do-it-yourself home renovation HGTV type shows, right? Where you can see the house that is in shambles, and then somehow magically 30 minutes later it is just beautiful and brand new. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you prefer the car restoration shows, where they take the old Mustang and then it's this big, beautiful thing. And I love those too. But the thing I know, and the reason I have never tackled either one of those projects on my own, is I know that a good restoration job depends on the skill of the builder or the mechanic. Right? You have to have the skill, you have to have the time, and you have to have the money to actually make it happen. So I know for me, if I go buy the broken down house, I'm just going to live in a broken down house, right? If I buy the old junker car, I'm just going to drive the old junker car. I don't have the time, I definitely don't have the ability, and I definitely don't have the money to get into some of those types of things. But the good news of Psalm 23 is that the pressure of restoration does not lie on us, but it lies on the Lord. And He has all the time, He has all the skill, He has all the ability to do it. And yet sometimes I think we can still resist because we feel like, well, I've went down that process before and it didn't work for me. When I was, I think I was probably 10 or 11 years old, my grandpa had a farm out in western Oklahoma, and we would come down and visit him every summer. We lived in Kansas, would drive down, stay for a little while. One time when I was down there, he told me and my cousin, hey, boys, come get in the truck. We're going to go to one of my neighbor's sales. So my grandpa was a farmer. He ran cattle. He grew wheat. He also had a little machine shop where he would do some work on equipment for the oil fields that were around his house. But then one of the other ways he would try to earn money is he would go to these auctions. They were always at his neighbor's house. And I lived in the city, so I thought that meant people down the road. And I learned my grandpa's neighbors meant they lived in his county. If they're within 50 square miles, I'm like, Grandpa, is this your neighbor? Because we've been driving for 40 minutes. Like, yeah, I went to high school with him. Classmate is the word you're looking for, not neighbor. You're not, but he just, if you're just a totally different outlook on life. So it says, get in the truck. We're going to my neighbor's house. He's having a sale. And so we went over there, and the auctioneer was out there, and they're selling all this farm equipment and all types of different things. And kind of out in the middle of this row of broken down cars is this old International pickup. And it's rusted out. Somehow, supernaturally, it has air in all four tires. So it will roll, but it will not run. And so they're working through everything. Grandpa's not really bidding on anything, and it's hot. My cousin and I are wondering, why are we still here? Now we've still got a 30-minute drive back home from the neighbor's house, and we're hungry and we're tired. And they get to this International pickup. And there's a guy, they started the bidding at $5. And there was a guy over on our side who placed the first bid at $5. And I still remember my grandpa turning to me and my cousin and saying, he's a scrapper. And he said it with such disdain. I had no idea what he meant, but I knew that was a bad thing to be. And he explained to us, because I think my cousin was like, what's a scrapper? Probably asked it a little loud in the way kids do, to where then the guy's aware. But my grandpa was saying, he's going to buy that truck. He's going to cut it up and sell it for scrap metal. And this deeply offended my grandpa, because he knew that International pickup had potential. And so he told me and my cousin, I'm not going to let him have it. And so he engages in a bidding war with the scrapper, where they are raising in increments of $5. My grandpa wins the auction and gets this International pickup for $40. And it was just a matter of principle. The scrapper's not going to get it. So we help him hook up this International pickup, and we're pulling it back to his house. And as we're driving, he's kind of laughing, and I think probably getting a little nervous, because he says, now boys, when we pull up to the farm, your grandma is not going to be happy with me. Because my grandpa already had his own row of broken down trucks and cars in the pasture behind his house. And with each one of them, my aunts and grandma, they would all give him a hard time of, when are you going to let the scrapper? Never. He'll never get my car. Just not going to happen. I'm going to fix them. I'm going to restore them. So we're driving home. He says, now boys, your grandma's going to come out of the house, and she's going to say, Vance Dow, what did you buy? And she's going to be mad at me because she thinks I wasted $40. But one day, when I fix this up, and it's my blue jewel, and I sell it for $20,000, she is going to love me. So we pull up, we drive down their sand driveway, and sure enough, my grandma comes out of the house. She kind of stomps off the porch, and hands on her hips, comes in. Boys, what did you let your... We're like, we didn't do it. We had the scrapper, Grandma. You can't let him have it. We don't know why, but you can't let him have it. And he's telling her, Norma, relax. I'm going to restore it and sell it for a lot of money. And he had the picture in mind. It was going to be this beautiful blue truck. So he called it his blue jewel. So we took it out, and we found a spot for it right at the end of the line of all the other broken down cars. And we parked it there. And 25 years later, I could take you out to his farm, and his blue jewel is sitting in the exact spot that we dropped it off in. It never moved, and that my poor grandma died, but one at least positive thing for her was she knew she was right on that car. I told you, you never did a thing, right? But here's the deal. My grandpa, he's now in a nursing home, and if I go visit him and mention his blue jewel to him, he'll still tell me, going to be worth a lot of money someday. So I'm going to get back out to that farm. I'm going to get to work on it. Now, here's the thing. My grandpa actually, he had the time, he had the skill, he had the money. He could have done it. And yet, he was still, 25 years ago, he's still running his farm. He's still running cattle. He's still got to plant crops and harvest crops. And so every time he would start to think, this is the season I'm going to finally restore this old International pickup, something else would come up. And because something else would come up, he never actually got around to the restoration. Now, for many of us, when it comes to the restoration of our souls, we recognize that there are things in us that are broken. And there are natural times of the year, times like Lent, maybe your New Year's resolutions, maybe it's when you have a big fight with your spouse about something or a kid is being particularly difficult, and you recognize in this moment, there are things that are broken and we need to fix them. And you might even, if you're a type A person, you might even sit down and write out the list of how you're going to fix it. These are the people we're going to talk to. These are the books we're going to read. This is what we're going to do and how we're going to get past this. And then what most of us experience in our attempt to restore our own soul is that life gets busy. And how are we supposed to take time to stop and really focus on us when we're going to work on Monday and the boss is demanding so much from us? Right? How are we supposed to slow down and rest long enough to really heal those hurts that are deep within us that flow out into such awful actions? How are we supposed to do that when just week after week we're chasing our tails from one appointment to the next, from one thing to the next, and it becomes this exhausting process? This is where Psalm 23, I think, is such wonderful news for us. Because as you listen to those words of David, he says, He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. All of the action in this passage is ascribed to God, not to us. All we do is receive the result of God's action. Right? He makes us lie down, so we lie down. He leads us, and we follow. And as he does these things, our souls are restored. So as we look at Psalm 23 this morning, what I don't want is for you to leave this morning thinking, I will finally do it. Right? I'm fine, because if you do, you're going to be just like my grandpa. 25 years from now, you're going to be saying the same thing. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Right? I mean, if you want to take that analogy in a different direction, you and I are all that old, broken down, busted up pickup. Right? But God comes to us as the master of restoration, who has all the time, who has all the skill, who has all the ability and all of the resources to bring us back to perfect wholeness. He's not bringing us into a land where it's just good enough and we're going to grit and grind and finally get through. But he says he will bring us into a space where our souls will be completely restored. David presents us with two ideas that help us understand that. First, he says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. And in this description, he's teaching us that God gives us exactly what we need when we need it. Now, that green pasture idea, because of the part of the country we live in, we probably have a different mental picture than what David would have understood and what David would have been describing. So for us, we think of green pastures. And we think of kind of these lush fields. Now, if you have any kind of farming background, maybe you think of alfalfa fields that are thick and full and green. Maybe you think of when that winter wheat starts to come up. You know, just the whole field is green. Or maybe you've got more of that city experience. And so your idea of green pastures is the park behind the church in the summertime, where it's just this big, wide expanse of green grass. But for most of us, when we think he makes me lie down in green pastures, it's this idea of God is going to take me into a space where he provides all I need. And everywhere I look around me, there is an abundance of what I'm going to need as well. And so the space where I will finally lie down and rest is the space where I know all my needs are satisfied now and all my needs will be satisfied in the future. And I know that because I can see it around me. Right? It's this motivation that pushes us to save for retirement and to save for the future of our kids, these types of things, to make sure that we have green pastures today and we're going to have green pastures tomorrow. But our understanding and application of that misses a big chunk of what David is trying to teach us. Pastor Amy's teaching the same lesson this morning to our 1st through 6th graders. And so a couple months ago, as we were planning out this series, I was reading certain books, she was reading different ones, but she came across this video of a man in Israel doing some teaching on what green pastures look like. And it's a beautiful description for us this morning. And so we're going to take about 3 minutes long or so. I want you to watch it, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about what that means for our understanding of this passage.
as part of the shepherd lesson, I did want to look at one thing in the wilderness that will maybe surprise you a bit. Believe it or not, this is called wilderness, midbar, but it's also called green pastures. Now, when you take a Westerner here the first time and you look at this, you find people say, well, I don't know that I can go there, because the Psalm 23, the Lord leads me into green pastures, has been pictured as belly-deep alfalfa. Well, you haven't seen any belly-deep alfalfa. And from biblical time to today, it's rare to see a flock in the farm country. There isn't a lot of farm country in this culture, and so farmers kept the shepherds out as much as they could. Maybe they would come in a little bit after the harvest to glean what was left, but you don't want sheep where you can farm. This is the land of the shepherd. Right on the hillside across from us, you can see those grazing trails, cut there by sheep maybe as long ago as Abraham's time. They're spaced so that an animal on one path and an animal on another can reach right to the middle between them. That determines the distance, so you can graze an entire hillside. And the shepherds lead their sheep across that hillside slowly, grazing what's there. Now, you look at it from here and you say, what's there? In fact, I remember my first impression. I woke up one morning, I was sleeping out in the wilderness, and I remember waking up, watching a flock of sheep on a hillside like this, and my feeling was, what are those, rock-eating sheep? I mean, what do they eat? How can you call this green pastures? Well, the answer is, there's a small amount of moisture present here. They get a little bit of rain every year. Not much, but a little. Second, there is humidity in the air, especially in the evening breeze. Like right now, you can feel it coming from the west off the Mediterranean. There's moisture in the air. That moisture, combination of the rain and the humidity, condenses or drips along the edge of these rocks here. And if you notice, right around the rocks, almost always next to the rocks, you get little tufts of green. Get one a moment. That's what we refer to as the green pastures. So the shepherd looks for a hillside. That's exactly what she was doing. Look at that flock across from us there. Just stunning. Those two shepherd girls have found a hillside that either was exposed to the wind or had that small amount of rain. And they move that flock across the hillside, and it's one mouthful here, walk a step or two, another mouthful, another mouthful, another mouthful. Now that changes the green pasture image a little bit, besides the picture changing radically. Green pastures are not everything you need for the rest of your life. If you make that belly-deep alfalfa, then what God is saying, if you follow me, I'm going to plunk you down and you'll never have to move an inch the rest of your life. Just reach out and grab it. Tell me that your life with God has been like that. Worry, said one rabbi, is dealing with tomorrow's problems on today's pasture. In the desert, you learn the shepherd will get you what you need for right now. 10 minutes from now, you trust the shepherd.
I love that idea because it reminds us green pastures will be found wherever God leads us. You're probably way more, I know, not probably, you are way more spiritual than I am. Right? I know that. I've talked to enough of you to know that for sure. And for me, in my immaturity, there are times that I just feel like I can't move from this spot until I know it's going to be better in the next place. Right? Like right now, at least I know and I can stay here. But God is calling, saying, follow me, come on, let's go, because there's going to be more there. But I don't always want to go because I can't see it. But what David is teaching us here is not that he makes you lie down in green pastures and always and forever you are surrounded by it, but he's teaching us as we follow the Lord who is our shepherd, we will lack nothing, and everywhere we need to rest, he will make us lie down in green pastures. So whatever you need, God will provide. And wherever you go, wherever he's leading you, he's going to provide for you, even if it's in these desert experiences of life. So David teaches us first, God gives us what we need when we need it. This is how he restores our soul. The second way is when he transitions to this idea of he leads me beside quiet waters. Right? And when he's teaching us this, what he's teaching us is God leads us to what is best. When I was a kid, my dad and my brother and I, one of our favorite pastimes, we lived in Kansas, was to go pheasant and quail hunting. And so my dad, we always had Brittany's growing up that he had trained, and it was so much fun to go out and hunt behind these dogs. They would find the birds, they would point the birds, they'd flush the birds, you'd shoot them, they'd retrieve them, bring them back to you. It was just so much fun. But those dogs are working hard, right? They're running miles and miles and miles over the course of a day's hunting. And so when it was cold, obviously they're going to get thirsty, but there would typically be some snow on the ground that they might eat, or we always had water in the truck for them. We would give them when they got back. But when it got hot, especially, then they would get thirsty really quickly. So on those hotter days, we would always be sure to put some water bottles in our vest or in our packs so that we could water the dogs as they were working. But here's the thing. I don't know if you have dogs or not. They're intelligent, and yet they're also stupid, right? And so our dogs, we'd be working these fields, and there might have been cattle in them a few days before, and so there's little mud holes everywhere that are just filthy nasty. But if it had the tiniest amount of water in it, our dog would stop and drink from it. Or we'd be at the end of a field, and most of the time there'd be a ditch along the road, and those ditches would have some stagnant, nasty water. And they would literally be 15 feet from the fresh water in the cooler, and we're in the process of pouring it in the pan, and they're over wallowing in the ditch. Right? And each time we're trying to call them out of that because we know our backyard is going to pay the cost of their sins for the next day, right? Like, it's not good water. It's not going to do good things to their stomach. My mom's going to gripe at us because of how bad they smell when we get home. So all of these things, and we're trying to call them out of it and lead them into something better. What David is telling us here is that the Lord leads us beside quiet waters. Now, for the sheep, water is essential for life, and what David is teaching us is God knows the things that are essential for your soul to thrive, and He's going to lead you to them. The temptation we face, though, is that we often settle for what is most convenient instead of waiting for what is best. When Jesus comes, He promises us in John 4 that He is the living water. And whoever drinks from Him will never thirst again, that springs of eternal water will well up within them. And he's painting this picture for us of God has created us with certain longings in our heart. Longings to belong, longings to know that we matter, that we're doing something significant, longings to love and to be loved. And Jesus says, every longing in your heart, I will perfectly and finally satisfy with my presence. I will lead you away from what is convenient. I will lead you away from all of the imposters. I will lead you away from the mud puddles and stagnant ponds into what is best. Streams of living water that will never run dry, that will overflow into these eternal springs that perfectly and finally satisfy your soul. This is what David is describing. God restores our soul because He knows what we need and He's going to provide it for us. Our challenge is to follow Him to the quiet water. To not be distracted by what is more convenient, what is faster, what is easier, what provides temporary relief. And this works itself out in so many different ways in our life where God is calling us into a life of fullness. And we settle for lives where we have just a little bit of His presence, just a little bit of knowledge about Him, and continue to struggle because we're drinking from the mud puddles of our culture. So David says, trust the shepherd to lead you to these waters that will perfectly and finally satisfy. Now, he also puts a qualifier on that. He says, He leads me to quiet waters. And again, this is one of those things that if we take a moment to consider what he's saying in the context of what he's saying, it's going to make more sense to us. Now, for sheep, fast-moving water was dangerous. Right? About 10 years ago, we started taking the seniors from Christian Chapel, our remnant seniors, out to Colorado to go whitewater rafting through the Royal Gorge. It's such a fun trip. If you're a junior high or high schooler, you got to stick with it till your senior year. It is one of the most fun things you're going to do in your life. But right before you go through the Royal Gorge, there's a section you raft through in the morning called Bighorn Sheep Canyon. And it's named that because there are bighorn sheep who live there. And if you go through right part of the day, right time of year, you can see them kind of grazing on the hillsides that go down into the river. And what your guides will tell you is this is a great spot for these sheep. They've got plenty of food. The river provides them with constant access to water. But you also notice you will never see the sheep coming down to drink from a section of rapids. Right? They navigate. You can see their paths. All of their paths come down to the spots where there's a little eddy, where it's pooled at the side, where it's calm. And obviously the reason they do that is because if they get in those rapid sections and they're getting a drink and they slip, then the water that was supposed to give them life becomes the thing that takes their life. So when David says, "You lead me beside quiet waters," he's teaching us that God is going to provide for us, but he's not going to provide for us in a way that brings harm to us. Several years ago, I was reading a book, and the author described this prayer that he had started praying in his life as a young adult, and it just gripped my heart in such a way I started praying it myself. He said, I started praying every day, "God, in my life, in every area, please don't let my success grow faster than my character." And it was just this idea of, because we think a lot of times people turn their back on God because life goes bad. But just as many do because life goes good. And they buy into this lie of, well, I've succeeded. And look at all I've done, and look at all I've accomplished, and I guess I don't really need him. And in doing so, the thing that God brought them, that was giving them life, this significance, this meaning, becomes the thing that kills them because they turn and begin to worship the gifts instead of the giver. So when David says, "You lead me beside quiet waters," he's teaching us not only to trust that God will provide for us in seasons of lack, but also to trust that God will provide for us in seasons of abundance. And sometimes it's in those seasons of abundance that our souls desperately need to be restored and need to be refreshed. And so perhaps for you today, the prayer is not, "God, save me from the desert." The prayer is, "God, save me from my success. Don't let my success outgrow my character." And what David says is that when we begin to pray these prayers, begin to understand that it's the Lord who leads us and makes us lie down. It's the Lord who leads us to these quiet waters that satisfy our souls. When we begin to have this experience, he restores our souls. Everything that's been broken, he restores. Because he provides what we need when we need it for that exact moment. So for us this morning, it means that whatever we're facing, we can be confident that God is aware of it and God can take care of it. This is ultimately what it means for God to restore our soul. It's for him to bring us into the space where no matter what we're facing, no matter what we're dealing with, we recognize he's aware of it. This has not caught him off guard. It is not surprising to the Lord that you are in a difficult spot at work. It has not caught him by surprise that you are grieving the loss of someone you love. He is not alarmed that your dreams have not been fulfilled. He's not ignorant of the fact that your marriage is struggling. God is aware of it, and his attention should bring peace to our heart. But it's not just his attention that encourages us, it's also his love that compels him to act on our behalf. He sees it, he's aware of it, and he can take care of it. He moves towards us. He doesn't just say, "Okay, I see it, now I hope you have good luck getting through it." But instead, he comes to us and says, "You are broken, you are hurt, and I will restore, and I will refresh." I want you to hear that message of Psalm 23 this morning as God's message to you. He restores your soul. There is nothing you're experiencing that has caught him off guard. There's nothing you're walking through that is beyond his ability to act. This morning, you may be broken by the pain you've inflicted on others, and yet the message of the gospel is he restores your soul. You might be crushed by the pain you've inflicted on others, but he restores your soul. You might be disappointed. You might be tremendously successful and feeling like, I don't actually need this. And he comes today to restore your soul. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? I want to I just want to read this first part of Psalm 23 over you today. And I want you to hear it as God's message to you. I am your shepherd. You will lack nothing. I will make you lie down in green pastures. I will lead you beside quiet waters. I will refresh your soul. These are the promises of God to us, made real by the presence of God in our lives. Jesus, we come to you today and we pray that these truths would move off of the pages of Scripture and into each one of our hearts. You see the ways that we're broken. We're asking for you to bring restoration this morning. You see the ways that sin has wrecked our lives and the lives of those we love. We're praying that you would bring refreshment to us today. You see our fear over what the future might hold. We're asking that you would help us to trust that wherever you lead, there will be green pastures and there will be quiet waters. Lord, we pray that you would help us to have a big view of who you are, that our problems would shrink as we consider your greatness, and that our hearts would be overwhelmed by the reality that in your greatness you have chosen to come down and be part of our lives. You've chosen to be the personal shepherd of each one of us, to lead us and to guide us, to restore us and renew us. So Lord, for those who are in bondage to chains of sin this morning, may you bring freedom and restoration. To those who have burned down their relationships and their dreams, may you begin to restore and rebuild. To those who are crippled because of what has been done to them by others, may you raise them to new life again. Jesus, we ask that you would come and accomplish what you have promised in a personal and powerful way. In Jesus' name, amen. If you'll stand with us, the band's going to lead us in that song they did just a few minutes ago, declaring the greatness of who God is. As they do, I'm going to ask our pastors and their spouses to come forward. We want to have an opportunity to pray with you, believing that God restores. And so if you need that restoration, you need that provision, you need to experience His power and His presence in any way, we would love to pray with you as we sing this final song together.
Give life